you're restricting. But then what happens is that after doing that practice for a while, like like any practice starts really as a restriction. Like in meditation, we narrow the focus of the mind in order to then have this expansive experience, right? Or in yoga practice, we sort of narrow and restrict the movements of the body in order to have this expansive experience of the body. So similarly, at first ahimsa feels like this restriction, like this pulling back, but really what it is it's an expansion of our experience of love in the world.
Mm-hmm.
And you get to a point of practicing ahimsa or practicing reducing your harm when suddenly it doesn't feel like you're denying yourself. It doesn't feel like you're missing out. I never miss bacon. I never miss cheese. I never miss anything because I don't feel like I'm missing anything. Instead, my practice is this expression of my love for the world. And I think, I think it can be difficult at first because there are so many like pressures from all over, and there's all this conflicting, propaganda being written by the meat and dairy industry. And, they have enough money to sort of launch these gigantic political campaigns and ad campaigns and whatnot. I think it can be difficult to like really see the path sometimes. And so I have compassion for that. But at the same time, it is such a central part of what we're doing at Jivamukti that I don't know if I understand why you would be interested in teaching Jivamukti if you didn't think that that was a fundamentally important part of it.
Mm-hmm.
Because there's so many yogas, right? It's like there's so many yogas in the world,
Yeah.
and they're all great, and there's something for everybody out there. And I really try not to I love this expression, don't yuck my yum, right? And so I try not to yuck other people's yums.
Mm-hmm.
Like you can totally like what you like. You go to whatever yoga studio that feels yummy to you, and that's awesome. But again, I don't know why. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know if Jivamukti would be right as a teaching path if you're not into ahimsa and veganism as being kind of a central idea.
Yeah, because don't you also like what because you're describing a lot about also about like how you were treating yourself or also about the eating. And I sometimes also feel like I think a lot of people think about themselves more than the victims. And I think when you say I don't miss anything, I think you're also I think we're also thinking about, well, I don't miss cheese because I know where it's coming from, so like
Yeah.
there's also
Yeah, because it just doesn't seem appealing when you know
yeah
what it is.
yeah. Because I think that a lot of people say a good friend of mine, he's always saying yeah, I'm nearly vegan. It's just like he likes to have little snacks or there's just this one thing that he really enjoys eating, and I'm like, well, but that's also you just thinking about you, I like to have, I don't know, a croissant, or I still like to eat cheese. It's like then that's just you, and it's
Yeah. Yeah. Even one way to think about is people love to do juice cleanses, right?
hmm.
And the idea with a cleanse is that somehow you're detoxifying your body, which I don't know, I don't know to what extent that works or not. But people then go and buy these expensive juices that are in, plastic containers, and then they throw the plastic containers away, and then the plastic ends up in the ocean.
Mm-hmm.
And so the idea that cleansing one's own body is more important than cleansing the rivers and the oceans and the air is so backwards to me.
Yeah.
There is no such thing as a cleanse if you're then just clogging up the oceans and streams, then there's no clean water to nourish my body with anyway. So what good is a cleanse?
Yeah, and it's also like what I really hear you say, and that I always say is like also taking a responsibility. Like what you just said about the cleansing. It's like, well, but then you're throwing out plastic that is going to end up in the ocean. It's also taking responsibility of like, I'd like to do a cleanse, but then I don't know, I'll bring my own bottle, or I'll make sure that what I'm doing. I mean, it's hard to be 100%.
Like, what if people did 10 days of like river cleanup instead of 10 days of master cleansing or something? Like that would be, that would be a very cleansing experience, I assume.
Yeah, yeah,
You
yeah,
know?
exactly,
Like,
exactly.
that would be more interesting than like, sort of personal purity cleanses, or that's how I think of them anyway.
Yeah, yeah.
But the number one polluter of oceans and streams is the livestock industry.
Mm-hmm.
So, when you are, purchasing meat or dairy, you are contributing to ocean water and river water pollution,
Yeah.
um, on a scale that many people can't even comprehend.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I mean, we're talking millions and millions of gallons of waste going into the water systems, and then and then we have many parts of the world lacking clean water. We have a clean water, a potential crisis of clean water in this world where we may not be able to access clean water
Mm-hmm.
in short time because we're tapping out all the aquifers and we're polluting all the rivers and streams, and we're just not thinking we're not thinking very far in advance here.
Exactly. Exactly.
There's not a lot of forethought going on here.
Mm-hmm. And for you personally, like two questions really. Like, were you already vegan when you entered the path of Jivamukti, and how did you find Jivamukti, or how did it find you?
I was hoping you would ask that question because when I was young, maybe 10 or 11, I did decide on my own that I wanted to be vegetarian.
Hmm.
But I didn't really know what that meant. I just kind of like didn't get this whole like eating animals thing. And I at least was wise enough to kind of connect to the dots that, something had to die
Mm-hmm.
to then appear on my plate. So I wanted to be vegetarian. So I told my parents. Mm, they weren't like super thrilled, but they didn't like shame me for it. They just sort of like, okay, well then you'll have like the potatoes and the vegetable, but then we'll just, you just won't have the sort of chicken leg or something.
Mm-hmm.
So, I do believe that they did their best, but they knew as little as I did. None of us, knew very much at the time. And I didn't know any other vegetarians.
Mm.
I didn't know anyone who was vegetarian. And I think that's what made it difficult. It wasn't a lack of options. It was that I had no one to
Around. Mm-hmm.
talk to or to ask questions or to like, well, what are you making and what are you eating? Get inspired from stuff like that. And so it kind of fizzled out, and I kind of stopped doing it so much. And then I was like an omnivore all the way through college and then a little bit after college. And then I was in a place where I like knew I wanted something to change, and I was going through some challenges in my own life. So I decided to check out yoga.
Mm-hmm.
And it just so happened that like Jivamukti was 5 blocks away from my place. So it was just like the first place I walked into.
Mm-hmm.
And I took class and I totally loved it
Mm-hmm.
from like moment one, class one. I was like, okay, I'll do this. Sign me up. I'll do, 2 classes a week, before work.
Yeah.
This is totally my vibe. I loved the cool music that they were playing. I loved the like philosophical components. I had studied philosophy in college, so that really jived with me. And I loved how physically challenging it was. I've always been a pretty physical person, either, you know, athletics, field hockey, or ballet, dance training. But I've always been a really physical person, and I liked how challenging the physical component was. Very dynamic.
Mm-hmm.
Then I started like reading more about Jivamukti. Oh, I came home from that first class. Oh gosh, I almost forgot. This is a great part of the story. I came home from that first class. I walked into my living room. I was sharing an apartment with a time with one other young woman. And I looked on the bookshelf and she had a copy of the Jivamukti Yoga book.
Oh my God.
And I was like, that's weird. And I opened it up and it was signed by Sharon and David
Oh.
inside. And I was like, this is so funny. What an odd coincidence. So then I like start flipping through the book and there's a part about ahimsa and about vegan living and compassionate living. Mm-hmm. And I go like, yes, this is it. This was that instinct that I had even when I was a kid and I just didn't know how to express or how to live by or how to enact it in my own life. But this is it. Mm-hmm. So I just felt like, every component of the practice really like drew me to it. But I just felt like, yes, this fits. This has always fit my heart and mind,
Mm-hmm. And then it just came together like that.
It just came together like that. And then it used to be back in the day to go to teacher training, we had a certain amount of assigned reading. Mm-hmm. And you could pick, in those days, Sharon Gannon's Yoga and Veganism book had not been published yet, mm-hmm. which I highly recommend that book, of course. But at the time, we were able to select like one of 3 or 4 animal rights books to read before our teacher training. Mm-hmm. It was like Peter Singer's Animal Liberation, or Diet for a New America by John Robbins, or there were like a few of the classics, which I recommend everyone read all of those too. Mm-hmm. So I read Diet for a New America. I chose that one, John Robbins. It's an excellent book. And it's actually, even though it's an older volume, it's actually very contemporaneous. All the information is still correct and accurate. Mm-hmm. And I got to the veal chapter. And they describe, because, I was like, oh yeah, vegetarian, I get it, but still eating some yogurt, some eggs, And then I got to that chapter, and what it describes is that the dairy industry wouldn't be viable if it weren't for stealing babies from their mothers and locking them in cages with no light and food that's like so low iron that the babies, they like lick the lock of the cage because they're so desperate for some iron in their bodies. Like, these are, you're depriving animals of love and sunshine and food just so that you can have some veal, just because for that prized, veal meat. But that really the price of veal and the value of veal contributes to the dairy industry. Mm-hmm. And when I made that connection, I thought, okay, no more milk for me. Mm-hmm. Because I didn't make that connection. We sometimes think that since milk can be taken from animals without necessarily killing them, that might be what's happening, but it's not really what's happening. And all those dairy cows get killed as well. They're not, they don't just get retired off into a pasture somewhere,
No, and way too early into their lives as well. So
yeah, and they're all very young because their bodies have been overly abused. And then, it just, the dairy cow does not live a happy life. So that was the turning point for me.
And when was your teacher training? Soon after discovering Jivamukti, or how long were you practicing?
Very soon. I signed up for teacher training within like 6 months of practice. I mean,
Yeah.
I know other people who have said like, oh, well, I've only been practicing for 10 years. Am I ready to go to teacher training? And I'm like, yeah, I mean, I had been practicing for 10 months and I just ran off to teacher training because I was just hooked,
Yeah. and here you are.
And here we are.
And you teach a lot, don't you, Jess? I mean, you really are a full-time